Look at the diamonds! Look at old Lady Melrose's necklace alone!" The Dowager Marchioness of Melrose was one of the few persons whom it had been unnecessary to point out to me. She sat on Lord Amersteth's right, flourishing her ear-trumpet and drinking champagne with her usual notorious freedom, as dissipated and kindly a dame as the world has ever seen. It was a necklace of diamonds and sapphires that rose and fell about her ample neck. "They say it's worth £5,000 at least," continued my companion. "Lady Margaret told me so this morning. That's Lady Margaret next to your Mr. Raffles, you know. And the old dear will wear them every night. Think what a haul they would be! No, we don't feel in immediate danger at the rectory." When the ladies rose, Miss Melhuish bound me to fresh vows of secrecy, and left me, I should think, with some remorse for her indiscretion, but more satisfaction at the importance which it had undoubtedly given her in my eyes. The opinion may smack of vanity, though in reality the very springs of conversation reside in that same human, universal itch to thrill the auditor. The peculiarity of Miss Melhuish was that she must be thrilling at all costs, and thrilling she had surely been. I spare you my feelings of the next 2 hours. I tried hard to get a word with Raffles, but again and again I failed. In the dining-room he and Crowley lit their cigarettes with the same match, and had their heads together all the time. In the drawing-room I had the mortification of hearing him talk interminable nonsense into the ear-trumpet of Lady Melrose, whom he knew in town. Lastly, in the billiard-room they had a very great and lengthy pool, while I sat aloof and chafed more than ever in the company of a very serious Scotchman, who had arrived since dinner, and who would talk of nothing but the recent improvements in instantaneous photography. He had not come to play in the matches, he told me, but to obtain for Lord Amersteth such a series of cricket photographs as had never been taken before. Whether as an amateur or a professional photographer I was unable to determine. I remember, however, seeking distraction in little bursts of resolute attention to the conversation of this bore. And so at last the long ordeal ended. Glasses were emptied, men said good night, and I followed Raffles to his room. "It's all up," I gasped, as he turned up the gas, and I shut the door. "We're being watched. We've been followed down from town. There's a detective here on the spot."
"How do you know?"
asked Raffles, turning upon me quite sharply, but without the least dismay. And I told him how I knew. "Of course," I added, "it was the fellow we saw in the inn this afternoon."
"The detective," said Raffles. "Do you mean to say you don't know a detective when you see one, Bunny?"
"If that wasn't the fellow, which is?"
Raffles shook his head. "To think that you've been talking to him for the last hour in the billiard-room and couldn't spot what he was!"
"The Scotch photographer?" I paused aghast.
"Scotch he is," said Raffles, "and photographer he may be. He is also Inspector Mackenzie of Scotland Yard, the very man I sent the message to that night last April. And you couldn't spot who he was for a whole hour! Oh, Bunny, Bunny, you were never built for crime."
"But," said I, "if that was Mackenzie, who was the fellow you bolted from at Warbeck?"
"The man he's watching."
"But he's watching us." Raffles looked at me with a pitying eye, and shook his head again before handing me his open cigarette case.
"I don't know whether smoking's forbidden in one's bedroom, but you'd better take one of these and stand tight, Bunny, because I'm going to say something offensive."
I helped myself with a little laugh. "Say what you like, my dear fellow, if it really isn't you and I that Mackenzie's after."
"Well, then, it isn't, and it couldn't be, and nobody but a born Bunny would suppose for a moment that it was. Do you seriously think he would sit there and knowingly watch his man playing pool under his nose? Well, he might. He's a cool hand, Mackenzie, but I'm not cool enough to win a pool under such conditions. At least, I don't think I am. It would be interesting to see. The situation wasn't free from strain as it was, though I knew he wasn't thinking of us. Crowley told me all about it after dinner, you see, and then I'd seen one of the men for myself this afternoon. You thought it was a detective who made me turn tail at that inn. I really don't know why I didn't tell you at the time, but it was just the opposite. That loud, red-faced brute is one of the cleverest thieves in London, and I once had a drink with him and our mutual fence. I was an East Ender from tongue to toe at the moment, but you will understand that I don't run unnecessary risks of recognition by a brute like that."
"He's not alone, I hear."
"By no means. There's at least one other man with him, and it's suggested that there may be an accomplice here in the house."
"Did Lord Crowley tell you so?"
"Crowley and the champagne between them. In confidence, of course, just as your girl told you. But even in confidence he never let on about Mackenzie. He told me there was a detective in the background, but that was all. Putting him up as a guest is evidently their big secret, to be kept from the other guests because it might offend them, but more particularly from the servants, whom he's here to watch. That's my reading of the situation, Bunny, and you'll agree with me that it's infinitely more interesting than we could have imagined it would prove."
"But infinitely more difficult for us," said I, with a sigh of pusillanimous relief. "Our hands are tied for this week, at all events."
"Not necessarily, my dear Bunny, though I admit that the chances are against us. Yet I'm not so sure of that either. There are all sorts of possibilities in these three-cornered combinations. Set A to watch B, and he won't have an eye left for C. That's the obvious theory, but then Mackenzie's a very big A. I should be sorry to have any boodle about me with that man in the house. Yet it would be great to nip in between A and B and score off them both at once. It would be worth a risk, Bunny, to do that. It would be worth risking something merely to take on old hands like B and his men at their own old game. Eh, Bunny? That would be something like a match. Gentlemen and players at single wicket, by Jove!"
His eyes were brighter than I had known them for many a day. They shone with the perverted enthusiasm which was roused in him only by the contemplation of some new audacity. He kicked off his shoes and began pacing his room with noiseless rapidity. Not since the night of the old Bohemian dinner to Reuben Rosenthal had Raffles exhibited such excitement in my presence, and I was not sorry at the moment to be reminded of the fiasco to which that banquet had been the prelude. "My dear A.J.," said I, in his very own tone, "you're far too fond of the uphill game. You will eventually fall a victim to the sporting spirit and nothing else. Take a lesson from our last escape, and fly lower as you value our skins. Study the house as much as you like, but do not go and shove your head into Mackenzie's mouth." My wealth of metaphor brought him to a standstill, with his cigarette between his fingers and a grin beneath his shining eyes.
"You are quite right, Bunny. I won't. I really won't. Yet you saw old Lady Melrose's necklace? I've been wanting it for years. But I'm not going to play the fool. Honor bright, I'm not. Yet, by Jove, to get to windward of the Professor's and Mackenzie, too! It would be a great game, Bunny. It would be a great game."
"Well, you mustn't play it this week."
No, no, I won't. But I wonder how the Professors think of going to work. That's what one wants to know. I wonder if they've really got an accomplice in the house. How I wish I knew their game! But it's all right, Bunny. Don't you be jealous. It shall be as you wish."
And with that assurance I went off to my own room, and so to bed with an incredibly light heart. I had still enough of the honest man in me to welcome the postponement of our actual felonies, to dread their performance, to deplore their necessity, which is merely another way of stating the too patent fact that I was an incomparably weaker man than Raffles, while every whit as wicked. I had, however, one rather strong point. I possessed the gift of dismissing unpleasant considerations, not intimately connected with the passing moment, entirely from my mind. Through the exercise of this faculty, I had lately been living my frivolous life in town with as much ignoble enjoyment as I had derived from it the year before, and similarly, here at Milchester, in the long-dreaded cricket week, I had after all a quite excellent time. It is true that there were other factors in this pleasing disappointment. In the first place,